this simply isn't straight dealing, because what was signed at Lisbon was a constitutional treaty. It is identical in content to the constitution that was kicked into touch by the French and by the Dutch. And all you've done is you've dropped the C word for fear that will cause offence, you've renumbered the articles, and you've given us a treaty. And frankly, what you've been engaged upon is nothing better than a giant deceit, a deliberate attempt to force upon the peoples of Europe the constitution, but without having the courage to call it that. It is dishonest. It is designed purely to stop there being referendums in member state countries. And behind all of this is this new and I think extremely dangerous form of Euro nationalism, the desire to create this state. And it doesn't take no for an answer, and it's not prepared to stop at anything. Dishonesty with which this whole process is being pursued. For Angela Merkel, in a letter, to talk about the proposal to use different terminology without changing the legal substance, I mean, it's Alice through the looking glass stuff, isn't it? It's the twisting of language. It is the deliberate attempt to stop there being free and fair referendums in European countries. But worst of all, it's the sheer arrogance of saying that you know best when it comes to the European project, showing contempt not just for the Irish people, but for the very concept of democracy which you say you're a champion of. I don't think you get it, do you? The peoples of Europe do not want deeper political integration. That's why in France they said no, and in Holland they said no, and in Ireland they said no. And if we had a vote in Britain, an overwhelming majority of us would have said no. What price democracy, Mr Sarkozy? Ladies and gentlemen, do enjoy the 10th birthday of the euro, because I very much doubt you'll be celebrating the 20th. What we've seen this morning has been reminiscent of the old Soviet times. You can go on if you want, burying your heads in the sand. You can ignore the markets if you want to, but in time the markets will not ignore you. Shame on you, Prime Minister, for doing that. You have devalued democracy in our country. You have devalued the trust that voters have got in you as a British Prime Minister. And as far as the economy is concerned, you've told us that somehow you're the economic guru. You're the man that can save the world. Well, I remember very well your first big act as Chancellor, when you sold 400 metric tons of gold on the world's exchanges at $275 an ounce. At today's valuation, that would be $10 billion higher. But it isn't just the fact you got it wrong, because we can all get it wrong. It was the fact that you announced in advance how much you were going to sell and on what day you were going to sell it. It was an error so basic that the average A-level economics student, even in these educationally devalued times, wouldn't have done. To add to that, you've destroyed our private pension system. You took away from the Bank of England its ability to regulate the banks and gave it to the tick-box bureaucrats at the FSA in Canary Wharf. And we haven't heard an apology. Your government has apologised for the Amritsar massacre. You've apologised for slavery. You've apologised for virtually everything. Will you please apologise for what you did as British Chancellor, and then perhaps we might just listen to you. Thank you. Been treated this morning to a succession of unelected ageing bureaucrats telling us what a great success the whole insult to democracy. A pack of lies are being told. President, I would like to congratulate you on being elected, although I feel that this morning it's been more like a papal inauguration. And it's rather a shame that this Parliament, if it was a proper Parliament, would actually select members to sit in the chair on ability and not have the usual big group stitch-up. So that's rather a shame. You're not even pretending anymore. You're pushing ahead with all the symbols of statehood and trying at the same time to lie and cheat with the Irish by giving them a series of guarantees that are not worth the paper that they are written on. Whether it is Mr Blair or not, the fact is he will not be democratically elected. You've not been democratically elected. In fact, doesn't this rather sum up the whole EU? Isn't it a rather wonderful organisation for retired, clapped-out ex-premiers to have real executive power? Is it really going to be, at the end of this summit, are we really going to have a new European emperor? Is it going to be Tony Blair with his Empress Cherie? Well, good morning, everybody. You're all very downbeat this morning. I thought this was going to be a big, proud moment. I mean, it's taken you 8.5 years of bullying, of lying, of ignoring democratic referendums. 8.5 years it's taken you to get this treaty through, and on the 1st of December, you will have it. And, of course, the architect of all of this, Giscard, wanted from this constitutional treaty for the European Union to have a big global voice. But I'm afraid the leaders have suffered from a collective loss of nerve. They've decided that they want their faces to be up on the global stage, not somebody from the European Union, and so we've got appointed a couple of political pygmies. And we have a new President of Europe, Herman Van Rompuy. Doesn't exactly trip off the tongue, does it? I can't see him stopping the traffic in Beijing or Washington. I doubt anybody in Brussels would even recognise who he is. And yet, he's going to be paid a salary that is bigger than Obama's, which tells you all you need to know about this European political class and how they look after themselves. But at least he's an elected politician, unlike Baroness Cathy Ashton, who really is the true representation of the modern day political class. In some ways she's ideal, isn't she? She's never had a proper job and she's never been elected to anything in her life, so I guess she's perfect for this European Union.
Excuse me, Mr Farage.
Yes.
I would like to put down your postages. You made your presentation.
Right, okay.
Is
Yes,
enough for us.
Chaps.
Okay,
Calm down, chaps.
please continue.
Calm now. But I mean, she's never been elected to anything and no one knows who she is. Even the Prime Minister was talking about Baroness Ashdown as opposed to Ashton. I mean, no one has ever heard of her. She's even less well known than Herman Van Rompuy. I mean, that takes some doing, doesn't it? She's risen without trace. She's part of this post-democratic age. She married well. She married an adviser and a friend and supporter of Tony Blair and got put in the House of Lords. When she was in the House of Lords, she was given one big job, and the job was to get the Lisbon Treaty through the House of Lords, and to do so pretending that it was entirely different to the EU constitution. So she's good at keeping a straight face, and she vigorously crushed any attempt in the House of Lords for the British people to have a referendum. So here she is, never stood for public office, never had a proper job, and here she gets one of the top jobs in the Union. Her appointment is an embarrassment for Britain. But it's much worse. Well, at least I've been elected, sir. Unlike her, she's not been elected and the people don't have the power to remove her. Well, we have our two pygmies. We'll have the bland leading the bland. But I'm not celebrating, because they'll press on with political union, and whilst our leaders may have saved face for the moment for themselves on the international stage, they have all betrayed their national democracies. The European state is here. We're about to get an avalanche of new laws because of this Lisbon Treaty, and there's no question in my mind that there has to be a full, free, fair referendum in the United Kingdom to decide whether we stay part of this union or not. I hope and pray that we vote to leave, but either way, the people simply must be asked. Thank you. You've completely missed the point, because twice you said the people that were elected last week. They have not been elected. That is the point that I'm making, and in the case of Baroness Ashton, she has never been elected to public office in her entire life. She takes an enormously powerful job, and the peoples of Europe, of Britain, of everywhere else do not have the power to hold her to account and to remove her, and that fundamentally is what is wrong with this whole European Union. It's all about bureaucracy versus democracy. Things have gone horribly wrong. Mr Barroso, you said earlier we will stick to our course, and that means millions of people in Europe will be put through pain as you attempt to keep together this disastrous project that is the euro. It will fall to pieces. Of that there can be no doubt, as surely as it did for Britain during the exchange rate mechanism in 1992. You can laugh, you can smile, it won't work, it can't work, it will fall to pieces.
Nigel Farage.
In generations to come, children will be told a story. They'll be told that once upon a time Europe was divided. There was a big wall down the middle of it, and the people in the East were very poor, and they had no democracy, and they lived under an evil system called communism that killed millions of its own people. But joy of joys, the wall came down, and we finished up with 27 nations, and those people lived in democracy, and 500 million people lived in peace. But sadly, no, there is more, I promise you. But if I may, sadly, the story continues, the politicians in charge became very greedy, and they wanted money for themselves, and they wanted power, and so they resorted to lies and deceit, and they staged the most spectacular bureaucratic coup d'état that the world had ever seen. But they didn't need to use any bullets to do it. They were much cleverer, much more scheming than that. No, what they did is they put in place a new treaty. It was called the Lisbon Treaty. And then they gave 27 people total unlimited power. These were to be the people that made all the laws. Of course, they already had a flag and they already had an anthem, but they went about building a new state. But they ignored the people. And what they did, whether they knew it or not, is they recreated the very evil system that the people in Eastern Europe had lived under before. But the incredible thing was that many of the new bosses had also worked for that same evil system before. Well, of course, the plan was flawed, and their fanciful monetary scheme collapsed. But still, the new bosses wouldn't listen to the people. No, They made life tougher and tougher. They put tens of millions into poverty. They denied people a say. And in the end, those people had to resort to violence to get back their nation states and their democracy. And the moral of the story is they had learnt nothing from history. Members of the European Parliament, before you give this Commission power, remember that 60 years ago, an Iron Curtain came down on Europe. That now, with this Commission, there is an economic iron fist, and it's being felt in Greece today. We cannot build
Mr. President. Thank you very much. Thank you, Mr. President. Thank you very much.